Greetings, my wonderful students. Today we study the office of President and Vice President. Duties of the President. The President is the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces and appoints the heads of the executive departments and judges with the approval of the Senate. Also makes treaties with the advice and the approval of the Senate as well. And must ensure that all laws of the United States are faithfully executed. The President also has the power of the veto. President's term and salary. The original Constitution did not specify how many terms a president could serve. Washington served only 2 terms, setting a precedent or an example. The 22nd Amendment was passed. FDR, Franklin Roosevelt, pictured here, broke tradition and was elected to 4 terms. He's the only president to serve more than 2 terms. The 22nd Amendment was ratified in 1951, and now presidents are limited to 2 terms total. However, the actual time limit is 10 years, and that's due to the fact that if a person is the vice president and the president dies, then the vice president serves out the remainder of the president's terms. So you could be elected to 2 terms of 4 years each, that would be 8 years, and you are also allowed to serve out an additional 2 years if you became president through another reason. So the total amount of time a person can serve as president is 10 years. Salary and benefits. 1969 to 2001, the president's salary was $200,000 a year. Now it is $400,000 a year. Presidents get free medical, dental, and health care. And when they retire, they get a $148,400 a year pension or retirement. Qualifications. Constitutional qualifications. You must be a natural-born citizen of the United States. You must be at least 35 years old. You must be a resident of the U.S. for at least 14 years before taking office. So what that means is, let's say you are a natural-born citizen, but then your parents moved to another country and you grew up there. Well, if that were the case and you came back to the United States, you would still have to live here for at least 14 years before you became president of the United States. Government experience. It's not required to have any government experience to be the president, but it would be helpful. Previous experience helps somebody get the connections they need to be nominated by a party to run for president. The importance of money. A candidate must have access to large amounts of money to run a campaign. Now, the federal government provides some money, but more is needed for election. As you can see here, the process of fundraising, the money raised by the national party committees between 1988 and 2008, you see a steady increase in the amount of money that's raised and therefore spent in the elections. Political beliefs. Extremely liberal or extremely conservative candidates usually lose elections. So parties usually try to pick moderate candidates, people who can not only excite the individuals who are in a political party, but also individuals who are in the middle, who sometimes vote Democrat, sometimes vote Republican. Personal characteristics. Now, most presidents have had a Northern European background. Most were middle or upper class, and most have been white, married Protestant men. John F. Kennedy was the first Roman Catholic president, and Barack Obama was the first black president. Presidential succession. The Succession Act of 1947 established the line of presidential succession, as in what happens after the president and vice president are rendered either dead or incapacitated. The 25th Amendment gave the president the power to appoint a new vice president if that office became vacant. So, and an example when this happened was when President Richard Nixon's vice president, Spiro Agnew, became embroiled in a scandal before the whole Watergate thing, and he ended up having to resign. And so Nixon appointed Gerald Ford to the office of vice president. So Gerald Ford was never elected as vice president. And then Nixon became embroiled in the Watergate scandal, and he ended up resigning. And so Gerald Ford moved from the vice presidency to the presidency, and he's the only president in American history who was not elected to either vice president or president, and became president anyway. Presidential disability. Now, the Constitution did not originally provide for who would take on the president's job if the president became incapacitated. The 25th Amendment made specific rules to follow if the president became disabled. Now, the Congress would be informed of the president's inability to perform his job, and the vice president would then assume the duties of the president. The president can resume his duties by informing Congress that the disability no longer exists. But if the vice president and the cabinet members disagree with the president, then the matter must be settled by Congress. This became an issue, of course, because there have been assassination attempts, and in some cases where the presidents have gone to the hospital for various reasons and are unable to perform the office of the president. President Ronald Reagan survived an assassination attempt in the early 80s, and he was in the hospital for a while and unable to perform the duties of the president. And this amendment went into effect at that particular point while his vice president, George H.W. Bush, assumed the duties of the president at the time. The vice president's role. According to the Constitution, the vice president only has two duties. The vice president is the president of the Senate, and the vice president takes the office of president if the president dies, and assumes the powers of the office of president if the president is disabled. That's it. Modern responsibilities. Now, before President Dwight D. Eisenhower, most presidents ignored their vice presidents. However, since Eisenhower, more vice presidents have been given more responsibilities. Now, vice presidents conduct diplomatic activities, policy discussions, and lead groups in developing new policies. And I hope you enjoyed this slideshow.